first of all, say thank you very much for inviting me today, and congratulations on, I can't work out who actually was the first community-based housing association to be registered under the Housing Corporation rules. It was Govanhill, I thought, but maybe not. There is the question for the afternoon. So anyhow, I've been asked to say about the beginnings. Now, in the beginning is a phrase that's used for many stories, or is the once upon a time. And I've been asked to talk about it on a pictorial look. Well, let me just tell you, how many people have got pictures from the early 1970s? Very few, majority of people. We didn't have cameras of a big lot then. That's the first thing. So there are not that many pictures. You'll not believe it, but we didn't take pictures of some of the key events. I just don't believe it when I look back. And that was because, secondly, I think we didn't expect this to take off the way it has. And I think that's a very interesting one. You know, the bunch of people who started this off really had no idea that 50-odd years later, we'd be sitting in a room like this, in a city which is surrounded, as I was describing something earlier to somebody, in two rings, in many ways, of community-based housing associations. The inner city ring, and then the outer city ring, where community-based housing associations dominate, and where this is unique almost to, certainly unique to the UK. There aren't community-based housing associations like this. And it's time that the story, not just the beginning story, because I've told this beginning story so often, it's time that the rest of the story is told. So there's a challenge. It was Mary Taylor of the SFHA that challenged me to get the story of the Annie Zulu written. There's a challenge for somebody to get the next bit of the story written and to bring it up to date and to get it out to the world, because this is an important story that needs to be told. Anyhow, having said all that, in the beginning, once upon a time, there were always housing associations. There were almshouses, probably the oldest housing associations there were, and they go way back 14th, 15th century, mainly in England, but there was one in Scotland, in Fife. But the big moment, I think, for a lot of us came with Cathy Come Home. Who here remembers Cathy Come Home? Good number. Because Cathy Come Home, of course, was the film in 1966 about this homeless couple and their family, and it sparked off a great debate. It was one of the great television documentaries of our time. It created shelter, and out of shelter grew a number of housing associations, mainly called something Christian Action Housing Association. There was Christian Action Glasgow Housing Association, Christian Action Greenock Housing Association, Christian Action Edinburgh Housing Association. And all these housing associations, like many other housing associations before them, were about providing housing for homeless people. But that wasn't how the community-based housing associations actually started. So why do we have community-based housing associations when there have been housing associations for years? Well, this is the reason. I took this photograph of wee Jimmy in 1970. It makes me really feel old to realize he's nearly 60, if he's still with us. And it was because of him and his pals and the kind of housing environment that they lived in, not just the houses, but the environment itself, that actually said that something needs to be done. Now, something was being done. And this was Glasgow Corporation's vision for the city. This is how they were going to solve the problems of tenements. Because for many, particularly in the Labour Party, tenements equaled bad landlords, equaled slums. Slums had to be got rid of and had to be replaced, in this case, with high-rise flats. Some of you may remember the wonderful Basil Spence. We had the best architects of the days doing them as well. Basil Spence flats, and I love this picture because if you look on the right, there's the Queen looking at this. It's almost as if the city architect was pointing at it as saying, now, if we could only get the people to that size as well, we could do very well. But it's the lady with the hat realizing how similar her hat is to the Queen's. What an embarrassment. Anyhow, this was to be Gorbals. Fraser, this was before your time, I know. Or you were to go to Cumbernauld, new towns, and all the rest of it. This is how we were going to solve the problem. But then along comes, I used to actually say, there's a moment in time when God gets involved in Glasgow. And that was on the night of the 14th, 15th January 1968. I actually was in Canada at the time as a student working over there, and I heard the Lord Provost saying they've had a terrible storm in Glasgow. It's blown all the roofs off all the houses. And that actually was the moment when I think a major change took place in attitudes. We realized in the city just how big the problem was of the tenements and how impossible it would be to replace them all so quickly. So what happens is, this of course is in 1968. Now you know what happens in 1968, it's all about revolution. There's all this lot, and I love this one. Je participe, tu participes, you can go through it with me. Il participe, nous participons, vous participez, ils profitons. The whole of student riots. But there were actually protests going on in Glasgow as well. This is a protest meeting against the closure of a steamy. So it's a wonderful, I love the hats again. No, there are no ladies with hats here today. Right, so there was, people were beginning to agitate. They weren't liking what was being done. But the corporation, in its wisdom, decided, yes, we're going to have to do something about tenement improvement. So what we'll do is we'll take this place, the Old Swan. And what we'll do is we'll do what we've done in everywhere else. We'll clear everybody out, we'll do it up, and we'll put other people in. So the whole sense of community will destroy. But what we'll get is nice new houses. Well, there was a wee group in the Old Swan, headed by a remarkable lady called Margot Weir. And they didn't like that. And so there was a bunch of students from Strathclyde University, and I was one of them, who was asked to help. So we did the old techniques. You know, we called a public meeting, we had close meetings, we had newsletters, and we get everybody lined up to go and turn up at the council to meet the housing committee. The housing committee said, okay, do we need this? So we turned up, and we were really worried. The three students were really worried that the council would try and split this group up. As soon as we walked into the council chambers, the councillor, the chair of the housing committee said, I'm very happy to meet people from the Old Swan, but not people who are not resident in the Old Swan. So the three students had to leave. And of course, what happened? The councillors went round until they found the weak link in the chain. They broke the chain and the whole thing collapsed. So we had to go and think again. In the meantime, there was this government study called People and Planning. And it was published in 1968. And it was about how we could democratize our planning system. And alongside that, there was this student, me, saying, we should be designing with people, not for people. I was an architecture student. I was being trained to design beautiful buildings without actually knowing what the people were going to be doing. And of course, what worried me was if you had a lot of money and you wanted to build a house, you hired an architect and you were the client. But if you lived in an inner city area and you wanted to do something to your house, well, somebody else made the decisions for you. So that seemed to be wrong. Who was the client? At this point in time, I bring in the University of Strathclyde, which was quite interesting as an institution because it was actually getting involved in things like protecting and saving, well, not completely saved, but saving things like Greek Thompson Church and St. Vincent Street. The driving forces were two main people. Tom Marcus, Professor Tom Marcus, who was Professor of Building Science. And some of you may remember that he did a very interesting study of improving the environmental quality and the energy quality of housing out in Easterhouse. But alongside him was this young man, Jim Johnson, who actually was my tutor and really was my partner in crime in what we were about to do. Because we decided that I was allowed to do not a set of drawings as architects, but I was allowed to go to a place called Govan and to see if we could do something about public participation in architecture. So that's where we get to. And of course, Govan has a history. And, all of this rent strikes, all the rest of it, Mary Barber on the lot. And of course, it's across the river. It's almost an island. Still building ships at that time. Some very interesting buildings, some interesting institutions. But beginning to run down. It's Glasgow's second comprehensive development area, but it still has a life, a great life. And in fact, these were the telephone boxes when I first went to Govan in 1970. And each of these had not just telephones in them that worked, but had telephone books that were working. Interesting thought. But behind all that facade there was a major change taking place. And properties being knocked down. And this is another of our unseen heroes. This man's David Orr, who was the minister of Govan Old Parish Church at the time, and he set up an organisation called the New Govan Society. You said New Glasgow Society, New Govan Society. Now this is the New Govan Society on a trip around Govan, looking at Govan. Note the hats again. They started to have conversations about how the Govan CDA, the Comprehensive Development Area, would develop. Council decided they would actually do public participation in it. And what was very interesting was that this is the kind of models that people were to look at and all the rest of it. What was very interesting was the riverside housing in Govan, which is the first riverside housing to have been built in Glasgow for Lord knows how many years, was not supposed to be there in the first plan for the CDA. It was to be industry on the river. And the New Govan Society said, that's crazy. Why can't we live on the river? And so the change. So there was an issue about change being taken. There was an issue of people beginning to think about what we could do. And so the river became a nice walkway, and you can go to there. And of course, you can go to there from Partick if you want now, and then back in the underground. So we looked around with this New Govan Society for what was to be a 6-month student project down next to the shipyard, down next to Fairfield shipyard. Not perhaps the most auspicious of places, but we said, right, we're going to have a wee task force. What we'll do is, here is an area which is in the comprehensive development area, has a 15-year life. It's to come down in 15 years' time so that it will make way for a further education college. Okay, So what we'll do is we'll do low capital involvement. We'll not spend very much money, and we'll look after it regularly, maintain it. The plan was that we should have an office. I would move into the area, which I did. We had surveys, we had meetings, a lot of local publicity, and by this time we had a lot of local support from the local councillors. That's pretty critical in this story. But in looking at this tenement stuff, we decided there were 5 key issues. One was the issue of getting people to buy into it. It was a good idea if people want it. Secondly, if we could get people in, what about the technical issues? How do you fit bathrooms into tenements? Thirdly was, what kind of process? Because it's a very complicated system, having to get improvement grants and all the rest of it. Then there were the whole question of, well, what do we do about people that don't want or can't afford to improve? So that's where we started. And studies were done, reports were produced, meetings took place in my flat, and models were shown about how you could put a bathroom in, and even drawings. So this is a John Gilbert drawing showing how to put bathroom into a tenement. And then people started to say, right, we've heard you, this sounds a good idea, let's do something about it. And this is where I bring in yet another of the unexpected heroes. Theo Crombie, it's not a good picture, it's the best picture I've been able to get, and I've tried for about 10 years to get a decent picture of Theo. After he died, I'm afraid, I would try to get it then. But Theo Crombie had been in charge of the storm damage, and he became the inside man in the council. And it's important that you have that, that we had that. We had an inside man, and I remember he used to drag me in my flares and my leather jacket. Tried to find a pair of flares, but not now, not today. But he would drag me in and he would tell me, now when you go in, say this, and then once you're finished, bow and go out to the door. And I did that, and that was the way we played. And I said to him when he came to govern, to public meetings, I said, I want you to say this. You don't need to bow, but just stay. And Theo was a great support. And he actually was keen to get this lady to do what she had planned to do. This is Annie Gibbons. This is the lady who said, right, laddie, I've heard you. I want a bathroom. And so she put her application in to the House Improvement Clearance section, which was by now the thing that Theo was in charge of, in Elmbank Street. Some of us may have great remembrances of that. And then what happened? John Gibbons came home one Thursday night with a pink slip in his wage packet, and UCS workout was taking place. So we all marched along, joined the march, but then got ourselves organised. So that when the UCS work-in was over, we were able to move, and we got Annie's loo finished. Became a show house, full nonsense, and completely pinched off the private sector. Show house, come and see it. 700 people went through it, her house in 10 days, including very senior people from the Scottish Government, or the government as it was. I keep on calling it the Scottish Government. It wasn't the Scottish Government. It was the Scottish Office. And this is how you get for your money, because we made it as if you were buying a television set. And we could tell you could buy extras, and here is how you can pay for it. You get a grant, and we had a streamlined system for that. And this is what you get. This was Annie's loo. And then Mrs. Gibbons says, Annie Gibbons says, it's the best 190 quid's worth I've ever had. If that wasn't marketing in 1972, I don't know. Anyhow, after Annie's loo, what the corporation said was, Right, you've proved you can put a bathroom into 3 houses. 1, 2. Now, next, if you can sign everybody else up for it, then we'll create alternate to housing treatment area for improvement, and you can organise it. So we did that. Within 6 months, we get everybody signed up. We then had to find what we do about people who did not want to improve or couldn't improve, and we said we'd create a housing association. We also found a way of helping people who said, well, we really don't want a house here. And if we move out the centre house or even the side house and up our close, you could put that house into the next door house and make a bigger house. So, okay. So we got a rehousing arrangement with the council. And people who wanted to go were allowed to go. It was about choice. And of course, the Architecture Centre organisation called Assist was created to run this treatment area. Of course, there were other characters. This is Sheila O'Halloran, who was yet another of the, yet another of the great heroes. The way we played it there was that if you wanted your house improved, what you did was you got the rest of your neighbours together, up your close, you gave them a cup of tea, and you get everybody to sign up, and if that worked, then you would be put on the programme. So as you can see, the programme doesn't go number 1, number 2, number 3. It goes 9 to say 9, and it jumps about depending on who'd signed up. And there was, of course, a famous story of Sheila taking one of her recalcitrant neighbours up to Annie's loo, putting her into Annie's loo and locking her in the toilet and saying, you're not coming out until you've agreed. And I remember telling Theo Crombie that, so he said, see, community pressure? He said, if we had tried in the council, it would have been called harassment. And sure enough, so that's where we're going. The office, we created an office at 925 Guffin Road. You'll notice in this, yes, there are some disreputations. See, I told you about Flair's leather jacket and a red top. I've got a red shirt, and that's the best I could do. You'll notice that it says Councillor, if you can read it, it says Councillor Martin. That was our local councillor who became, of course, Speaker Martin in the House of Commons. And we did all sorts of things in that place. We had a planning inquiry. A planner came down once a week to tell people what was happening on the redevelopment. We had the Govan Law Centre, had its initial offices in here. There were all sorts of things came out of this office. But probably the most important was Central Govan. Now, I have to say, we couldn't find, it was originally called Central Govan Housing Association. It wasn't called Govan Housing Association, but since it moved out of just the centre, it had to change its name. And the chap on the right, and this will come strange in a conversation about community-based housing associations. The chap on the right is Jim Stephen, who ran Stephen's Shipyard. But he was an interesting character, and he became the first chairman of Central Govan Housing Association. I became the secretary, and we decided what kind of housing association we wanted. So we were going to create a different housing association, one that was local, that was about a local area. 2, had to be community-based. What did that mean? Well, it meant that membership was open to everybody who lived in the area. Now, remember, we're talking about an area which had owner-occupiers, had shopkeepers, as well as potential tenants, all of whom had an interest in the community and in the tenements being improved. So I got a lawyer friend of mine to change the wording of the document that we registered as a friendly society with, to ensure that membership was open to everyone and that therefore the board would be elected by the membership. Up till now, most housing associations, you became a member of the board or the committee, the management committee, because you knew somebody or somebody invited you in. It wasn't a democratic institution. And so we created a more democratic institution. And one of the things we said at the time that was important was the short line between the tenant and the chairman of the board. You know, if you think about it, in the council, if you were a tenant and the chairman of the housing committee was there, you had to do many levels before you could get to them. We said, no, we need to make it as close. And actually, even better, the chair should be somebody living in the area, understanding the area. And that's why it became a community-based housing association. And we also said it should have a local office, a local place where it would be. So we did that, and can you all read this? Life's a drudge with an outside kludge, but an inside loo is a joy for you. That was the slogan. And we did marketing and all sorts of things. And here are ladies, the kind of committee members. One of the interesting things about how community housing associations, community-based housing associations, is how lady-driven they are. And it's very interesting. We found it very difficult, even in the early days, to get a lot of men involved. And that was very much a matriarchal society we were working with. We actually did things like that got the back court. Yeah, that's the beginnings of it. That was the first back court to be done in Govan. Maybe not to the standard we now expect, but there was, at least all the bins were under cover. Then the next hero I want to mention is this rather portly gentleman called Lord Goodman. Now, Goodman was Harold Wilson's lawyer. Harold Wilson, at that time, being the Prime Minister. And Goodman had been appointed to head up a reorganized thing called the Housing Corporation. The Housing Corporation fundamentally, until then, had been dealing, Craig, with co-ownership and cost rents. But Goodman had been instructed to deal with poor housing conditions. And the story is that Goodman asked for two maps. One of where poor housing conditions were, and one of where housing associations. And he said, why are there no housing associations in Glasgow, or very few housing associations in Glasgow? So he dispatched his boy, his PA, David Astor, to come to Glasgow to meet the new Labour administration in Glasgow. Hard to remember that in 1968 to 1971, Glasgow was run by the Tories. Yes, and that was a great 3 years, because what it enabled the Labour Party to do was to reorganise itself, rethink itself, and look differently. You know, there may be a lesson for... So Goodman sent Astor up, and Astor went to see Jeff Shaw, who was Gorbals based and was the leader of the new Labour administration. And Jeff said, if you want to do something, go and see these morons, boys down in Govan, because they've got something to teach us. And so on the basis of that, the Housing Corporation and Glasgow City Council formed a partnership. That partnership was to take the ideas that we had developed in Govan and to make it citywide. But there were some changes. First of all, instead of assist, as it had been doing the coordination, it would be done by housing associations, community-based housing associations. Secondly, it would have a 30-year life, not the short life improvement that we had started to do in Govan. And interestingly enough, of course, eventually the 15-year life improvement we did in Taransi Street had to be done all over again to the 30-year life. And that was important. The third thing was it was going to have to be done by traditional contract. We had done a very interesting, as I said, it was like buying a television, what we were doing in Govan. But it was going to be the long traditional contract. And to help in that, because the costs were going to be outweigh the ability of many of the owner-occupiers, who are really owner-occupiers in name only, because they'd bought it in a deposit scheme, almost hire purchase scheme. It was beyond their economic. So there was, Jim Hastie arrived at this point in time into the Housing Corporation and set up an acquisition program, which really enabled it to roll ahead. And we were able to plan with the council where the areas the council wanted to go. We would then move in, get a committee going. I always remember standing early days in Tollcross on the platform at Tollcross and saying, right, folks, if you want your house improved, your landlord's not going to do it for you. The council hasn't the resources to do it for you. The only people that are going to do it for you is yourselves. And we in the Housing Corporation, because of the way we've been set up, will help. And that was the way we got many of these areas going. So, of course, there was decanting. And by this time, the magic word HAG had arrived. Because up till now, and this is where Jim Stephen from the early days in the chair of central government, he went round rattling a can virtually to get money. We could get an improvement grant that covered 3/4 of the cost. But the other 25% had to be produced from somewhere else. And Jim would tap people, he would get charities, various organizations. So although he looked as if he was never going to live in a tenement flat in Govan, he certainly was very strong part of the community. And I think we've missed some of that kind of stuff in the way that communities have developed over the last few years. But HAG became absolutely vital. And I was just saying at lunchtime, in fact, that later on, we were getting really good levels of grant right through. I remember one year we were getting £162 million worth of HAG a year. Now think of that compared to what is available at the present moment, and think of that 162 million is in the 1980s. So you can work out it's a lot more. And I remember we used to, in the Housing Corporation, Jim will remember this one in particular, we used to make sure that and miss a lot of housing associations were getting phone calls in March and saying, can you bring any bills that you've got that you could pay either on the 31st or on the 1st? And we would pile up the pile of this on the 31st. We would get it on the 28th. And I would phone up the Scottish Government and say, I've got £3 million worth of extra money here. Is there any spare cash lying about? And we would get it. Those were the days when we were getting great support from the government, no matter which political colour. And I think we ought to remember that. Anyhow, what happened, of course, was we then rolled it around the world. Rolled it around Glasgow. And we then moved from Govan heroes to local heroes like John Butterley. And of course, John Butterley is the one, as somebody may tell you, who got us central heating. So this is Govan now. New houses built by Govan Housing Association. And just some final thoughts. What made it work, from my perspective, in the early 1970s? Well, first of all, I think we're on the right time. There was a demand building up, but need to participate. Secondly, there's the question of the phrase nothing without us, nothing for us without, about us without us, which of course has become very famous as a result of South Africa. I think Cathy Come Home actually wakened the country up to the issues, and the storm certainly made it a clear place, the right time. And Govan CDA was the right place, just because of the way the participation had been going, developing on the CDA. And what about the right people? Well, I think, no doubt, the most important bit is the local community-based leadership. That makes it work. I think the university, which doesn't get enough credit sometimes, its involvement in local issues made it important. Then there's political commitment at national and local level, and given financial support. I think at those days, local, small-scale delivery was very much valued. There was a kind of feeling that small is beautiful was actually worth trying and demonstrating that it could work. And above all, I think the volunteers were valued, learnt, and found that they, by going through this process, by running housing associations, they do all sorts of other things. And that is really a very important thing. And somewhere in all of this, there were risks. When Jim and I joined the Housing Corporation, we were in our early 20s, and we were given a lot of freedom from masters in London, not in Edinburgh, in London. As did the council take a lot of risks in saying, right, we'll go with this, let's see it. The question I have is, how far are these values, these approaches still available today? How much have we constrained everything to the point where the values that we were working on and which then created the movement which we now see here today are still available for the future? And local heroes. Okay, what was the time?